Well, thank you, Vashti. This is the last week, or last penultimate day of a very long year and a successful year at Westmere School. So I'd just like to continue asking the same questions I've asked everybody else. And so, how has e-learning impacted upon your teaching pedagogy this year?
Well, I think at the start I just had a simple tool, a blog, and I had two games that I wanted to work with the children on, and I obviously wanted them to be able to use the blog. And so it was e-learning, and I was doing whole class teaching about how to use the blog. And it was almost like a distinct subject, but now when I teach and now when I plan, everything is actually integrated. So it's not e-learning anymore, it's just learning.
Just learning,
it's just teaching. So it's not a separate subject. I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't have to go through and teach what the tools are, but the children have enough knowledge to be able to actually run with tools that I haven't specifically taught now.
Yeah.
And the impact that that's had on my teaching is that I've had to be a lot more adaptable and a lot more flexible. So say if I send them out to do filming and that doesn't work, I'll send them straight on to extra normal. It only takes about 5 minutes to teach them, and they're producing quality work. The other thing is there's less reliance on their exercise books, and I'm not quite sure if that's a good thing or not, but in some regards those are just a draft book now, and the actual learning is a lot more digital than I'd ever sort of intended. There's lots in there to unpack, and we'll have to work on that a bit more. So you've mentioned a couple of your successes. So what changes have you had to make to your classroom management? I mean, you briefly talked about your planning there. Yeah.
In
every lesson now, like say I've got maths, there's a roster of when the children go on, and that doesn't change no matter what. You know, there has to be something fairly serious for them not to be going on to tup and practicing their basic facts now. And they've got a specific time that they go on. So every day up on the board they know that that's their turn for tup, and at this time the next person comes on, and then it's got specific to the point where you are on this level, you're on okie dokie, and you are doing a plus and a minus, you are doing a times and a divide, and then you are doing a mix. So they have to go through in that order every time, and I've had to be really specific to manage that, to make sure that the tools are being used for what they're intended, which is to build up their basic facts.
Just as you're saying that though, do you think that your class administration, the kind of keeping track of where the kids are at, has that got more complex, or has that become easier to manage?
In some ways it's got more complex because you have to manage the tools that you've got. If you've got 4 laptops, then you have to roster that in. But once you've done that initial hard work, it becomes simpler.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of assessment and record keeping. So if you're using stuff like TutPup, I know they got their classroom thing, but it's not like you've got a teacher's mark book anymore. I
mean, I can go on to, if I want to see if someone's actually doing writing, if they're actually producing work, I can look into the categories on my blog and see that child has absolutely got no work up there. So I know for a fact that they don't really know how to post. They're not producing anything past the draft phase, and that they need more time on the computer. So in terms of teaching for learning, where you're actually looking at the assessment and making sure that children are doing the work, it's a lot easier to keep track of because it's a lot more obvious, it's a lot more out there.
Oh, well, that's really interesting. So what challenges have you had to overcome to ensure e-learning success in 2010?
If technology fails,
you mean it does?
Yeah. Well, for instance, today we were just talking about why I can't upload things from the network onto my blog, which is fine. I go home and do that. I actually spend a lot of time at home on my blog and doing things and checking things out for kids anyway. But if it fails, then it kind of takes away from the independence that the children have. And one of the things I think about having a child-centred classroom is it has to be the kids doing the work, not me. And so ideally I would like them to upload it to the Westmere YouTube. So I want them to know how to do that. So,
yes, and I would agree with that.
Yeah, so until we get those sorts of things ironed out, I guess that's going to slow things down, not phenomenally so. The other problem is, one of my colleagues pointed out, that it can be quite difficult for parents watching this. It's not school as they know it, and so bridging that digital divide and trying to get them in to see what's going on. For some parents it's a little bit too much of a gap, and they can be quite worried that the learning isn't taking place. And then for other children, they don't have computers, so I'm trying to do that as well, give them enough opportunities that other kids naturally get in there.
So how do you reassure those parents that think that learning isn't happening because it's not a model they recognise from 30 years ago?
With a lot of support from leadership in the school. I don't think you can do it just by yourself, and I think that's been one of the huge benefits about having you here and having Melissa as an e-learning leader and Carolyn in behind it, our principal, is because all of a sudden it's not just one rogue teacher running out and throwing children on a blog and having unpunctuated, poor spelling. And I think,
yeah.
And I mean, I have had some interesting conversations where I've had to say that is my baseline data. That is data.
Absolutely right.
We're seeing them start to use punctuation and spell checks and now editing their work where, you know, I could work on that all year in their books, but when it's up on the blog and everybody watches it in the morning and sees it, that's happening. So I think eventually, when they start to see a shift and they start to see the personalities of the kids and realise that they're in control a lot more.
So have you had any of those kind of doubting parents come back to you at this end of the year and say it was really good? Have you turned them around?
Yes. I think so, but I haven't gone to them and given them the data and shown them how the learning has shifted. I just think that suddenly they're saying that those children are actually able to do more on the blog, and I haven't had the same complaints. And I also I think e-learning's an easy target, and that's what I've recognised, is that school has changed a lot with the new curriculum and also with what happened in '95. That was a distinct change from what we grew up with. And I think when you have e-learning, it just becomes an easy target for that. But in actual fact, I think a lot of the educational stuff has changed anyway.
Oh, of course it has. Yeah. So I mean, you've mentioned that data already. So what has been the impact upon student learning as a result of your e-learning integration this year?
I measured basic facts achievement, and I used TypePlus specifically to change their attitude towards basic facts, and because it does measure instant recall, you have to be able to instantly recall things. And we measure like on our Westmere standards, and I had about 67% of my year 3s at the beginning of the year below standard, which you would expect because they're not, you know, they're only just beginning, and at the end of the year I had about the same amount above standard. So there was a complete shift in their maths basic facts. They are now working above or at standard, the vast majority, and also in spelling. Most of my kids are now working above standard. And for the kids that are working below standard, their progress is a lot slower anyway, so they're closer to the mark, and we actually have data to show that. We haven't just used Spelling City for those children, we've used programs like WordShark and Steps as well. You still have to do effective teaching, but because they're so engaged with the games, and they actually have that link at home. A lot of the parents, when I said that I had to close down the blog this summer, like meaning I had to moderate it more viciously, I guess, because they're on holiday and I just have to make sure that they're using it correctly still when they're not in the classroom every day. They actually panicked now that they're not going to have a blog over the holidays. And they're like, oh my God, I've got to download all the links. And I was like, no, it's still going to be there. Yeah. It's just going to slow down a bit because I'm going to have to moderate every post that comes through.
No, that's okay, Vashti. We got cut off because the memory was full on this machine. So let me ask that question again. Have there been any unintended outcomes in student learning that you had not foreseen as a result of integrating e-learning this year for you?
Because my goal at the start was just to have a class blog, get a sense of community, give them homework links, build up their basic facts and their spelling, and I did all that by about the second term. And then I went to ULearn and got inspired by all these video things, and realised, I think it was Lane Clark, and she was talking about the literacy things, and I realised that I have this belief that the world is a text, and you talked about how technology is communicating information, not the other way around. And so it actually, my philosophy changed, and then what I discovered, say for instance, we looked at the Chilean miners, and I realised that children don't know what live means, and they don't know how to interpret what they see on television and on movies as reality or ads, which, we were studying advertisements, but what actually ended up happening is I showed them the footage of those miners getting rescued, and it brought the real world into their classroom, and I said to them, here are the miners getting rescued, and the kids, very good, nice to see them out. I said, they're not out, and the kids, their jaws just dropped. And they were like, no way. And I'm like, no, that's them in the mind. They're still trapped. And the literacy that grew from that was huge. They learned how to read diagrams. They navigated the BBC website. And just the discussions that they had were really amazing. They were very compassionate and empathetic. They were learning about making a difference in their lives anyway. And I thought, okay, that's amazing. That's incredible. Now we have to study newspapers and realise about sensationalist language as well as the advertising. So because advertising is in these mediums, then naturally we went on to the newspapers. And you know, that sounds like enough to learn anyway. There's the real world coming into the classroom, and I'm teaching children how to interpret footage, why they keep showing the same footage over and over again, what live actually means, and then being involved in something on the other side of the planet.
Because I was in school that day, and you're actually showing the live feed on screen, weren't you?
We watched it all day. We dropped our program, but it didn't mean that they lost numeracy or that they lost anything. They actually gained so much more out of actually feeling like they were part of the real world. So that relevance was in your face. It was really serious stuff going on in front of them. We all had our fingers crossed, hoping this was going to be good news. So that seemed like a big enough thing. And then, about a month or so down the track, the Pike River mine tragedy happened.
Of course.
And the next thing I know, like my children are they're interested in the news, they're literate all of a sudden. And so we ended up studying that tragedy, and the children understood that it wasn't going to be the same. And so they were reading the newspaper, having those discussions at home, posting things on the blog. We ended up in table groups creating our PowerPoints, and because of the way I manage it, each group ends up coming through at a different time. As you see the PowerPoints move on, there's a different focus to each of them. One group focused on the men who were trapped, the other group focused on the rescue mission, others focused on why they couldn't be rescued. And the real life learning from that was even deeper than what we got from the original incident that we saw. And I guess, you know, you make yourself vulnerable when you're a teacher doing that, because sometimes there are things that happen in life that you have to discuss that are not...
they're uncomfortable,
well, you have to think really carefully about it and get a lot of support to make sure that what you're teaching is actually going to be relevant to them at their learning level. And so the living and learning side of the digital part of learning how to conduct yourself in public because you're on the internet, learning how to interpret things that are happening in real life and how to respond to them appropriately, and how to manage that information and sort of analyse it and make a critical evaluation of it is probably, you'd think that would be an obvious outcome, but it's been so much more effective than I could have imagined.
It's interesting because I mean, I thought it was my last question. I mean, really, you've mentioned several times as you've through your answers, you've talked about the students being engaged and it being authentic and relevant with what you're doing. Now, I guess it's devil's advocate question this here. If you had taken away all the e-learning tools that you'd put in place, would you as a teacher, do you think, manage to get that same level of relevance and authenticity and engagement out of those students with those same events?
Absolutely not.
And so it was the immediacy of it that e-learning... it sounds like a leading question, but I'm just trying to interpret what you're saying here. And so what you're saying is that it was the immediacy of that the technology enabled you to put the kids right there at the right time, coupled with the tools and independence that you created with them throughout the year that sort of raised that that information literacy, I guess, is what you're talking about.
Yes, it is, because I didn't have control of the news.
Indeed.
And so what is happening is actually really happening. It's not filtered, it's not blocked. I guess we talk about like my LGP, Learn, Guide, Protect. So it's a guidance and a facilitation thing. I'm not in charge of some information on a particular slant. I'm having a look at a wide range of sources. The fact that it is actually available to them live when it's actually happening, so they do understand that it's real, and getting that through to them is just, it's very inspiring for them to actually see that engineers have this kind of impact, that everyday jobs are really this dangerous. But the other thing, like if you're being devil's advocate, they actually went into books with a much better attitude and were able to get more out of printed information because they'd actually made that link between printed information and digital information. So it works really nicely together, and I found them going through books that were in our library that they'd never really paid that much attention to before, and finding out about stuff like coal and bringing it to me and saying, look, this is how coal is made. So they went a lot deeper because of the digital information that they'd been given. And yeah, I just think they identified it with it more easily. People talk about the digital generation, and you think it sounds like jargon, and that, you know, that's not really what it is. But honestly, they've never known any other way of learning. They've all learned from televisions and computers and iPhones and iPods and everything. That is their real life. And I guess when I talked about bridging the digital divide, it's also about how you bring that into classrooms, given contemporary attitudes and what has happened in the past. I mean, we're not allowed to bring in cell phones and stuff like that. But yeah, I think because it is actually what they know, then it makes sense that that is how they would learn.